I recognize the name because it's here. Doesn't seem somebody from one of those little pictures. I should tag myself. I guess I should have a name tag myself, but I was recognizable.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Free Thought Festival. Thank you for sticking it out for the entire conference and for attending on Sunday. We value your attendance, we hope you had fun this weekend, and we hope that you come back next year as well. If you have any feedback for me, I'm more than welcome to take it. So, every year we have this conundrum of sorts. What are we going to do with Sunday for the Free Thought Festival? Are we going to host events? How do we make it so people show up? And this year, I hope we've solved that problem. We decided to co-sponsor this event with the Sunday Assembly. So it should be fun, should be more energized than a boring 10 a.m. talk on a Sunday when we're all tired after all the conference. So hopefully you guys all like this. If this is your first time at Sunday Assembly, then welcome. I'll hand it over to Daniel now.
Good morning, welcome. I'm also in control of the clicker, so if you see that clicking, that's me. Welcome to Sunday Assembly. I'm president and co-founder. Thanks for coming. For those who are normal Sunday Assembly folks, good job finding parking. Thank you for coming. Good job transplanting for those who it's your first time. Welcome. Good job finding parking or walking over here early. I was going to start off with a little intro of what Sunday Assembly Madison is, who we are, what we're doing. And I was going to do that by answering two questions that I often get. The first question is, how are we different than other free thought organizations here in the Madison area? Because there are lots of free thought organizations in the area. And then two, how are we not Unitarians? And these are legitimate questions. So going with the last question first, how are we not just a different brand of Unitarianism? Sunday Assembly Madison was founded by a group of atheists, specifically to be a group of atheists, for atheists, welcoming of atheists. And that's not to say if you're a non-atheist, get out. You know, we want other folks, but the songs, the themes, the speakers that we have, the jokes are all going to come from that perspective. And so in that way, Unitarianism doesn't always fit. There's a lot of overlap there, but there's also some gaps where it's just not comfortable to go to the spiritual and sometimes study supernatural places that Unitarianism goes. So then the other question, how are we different than the other free thought organizations in the Madison area? There's the Madison Skeptics, we've got the Humanist Union of Madison, the Freedom from Religion Foundation is right here in Madison, we've got the AHA student organization here. And so we think Sunday Assembly is a little bit different because we're about the celebration. You guys are going to have to sing with us in a little bit. And it'll be fun. And like being silly, so when we force you to sing a song that maybe you don't know, don't worry about it because it'll be fun and silly. And, you know, we're very much about building a community and really trying to just be a Sunday a month where you recharge your batteries and you come together to just feel good and you leave here with a sense of, oh yeah, life is a little bit sunnier. So that's the idea. And we want to do like social justice stuff, and we do have a support group that we sponsor. So we do other things too, but you know, the Humanist Union has really great speakers, but you won't see them singing along together. And the Madison Skeptics were out eating Mexican food skeptically last week. You know, they're very a social group. And we do some social things, but you know, we also have a lot of cross-pollination too, I will say. So Bob is one of our co-founders. He is also the leader of the Humanist Union of Madison. We got Peter, a band member of ours who you'll hear later, from the Madison Skeptics. I finally put my money where my mouth was and became a member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation last month. So it's good because it means we all like each other, you know, that we're all going back and forth between these groups, but it also means you can go to each group to get what you need. And so we think Sunday Assembly, we've got a little niche here where we hang out on Sundays and sing and get to be about the joy. A couple of other things, we've got an airing and sharing section later where people are invited to take the mic and share or air the grievance. That's where airing is. So you'll just have a minute or so if you want to make a comment about what you've heard, how you feel about Sunday Assembly, what's going on with the Free Thought Festival. So just start thinking about that. That'll come in about 3/4 mark. Okay, so welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm going to invite the band up because they're next. We're going to open with a song. You're guys going to have to sing along. And it goes fast.
We slowed this way down from the recording.
We tend to speed up.
I remember the other thing I was going to do. Okay, the theme is all tourism and human evolution. Something that we could ask, how did the songs connect? So, Big Bang is kind of astronomical in nature, but the Big Bang started it all, so that's how it relates to evolution. Also, some of the slides relate. That's what I got.
Yes. Our whole universe was in a hot, dense state. Then nearly 14 billion years ago, expansion started. The earth began to cool, the outer crust began to cool, the elemental walls began to cool. We built the pyramids, science history, unraveling the mystery that all started with a Big Bang. So from the dawn of man, it's really not that long at all. As time meditates to see the song of fraction of a second, when the elements were born, the fire that stood up straight in the end, and their faith. But they were late and they all died. They threw their asses on the roof and then who wanna be a set in motion by the same Big Bang. It all started with a Big Bang. It's expanding ever outward, but one day it will pause and start to go the other way, collapsing and burning first. We won't be here, it won't be heard. Our best and brightest picture, the it'll make an even bigger bang. How did you ever think that this would really happen? Sick of us debating how our ears are catching fear, we're catching viruses. We can get us out of the dark. Deuteronomy, it all started with a Big Bang. Music and mythology, insight and astrology, it all started with a Big Bang. It all started with a Big Bang. These guys in the front row, they were here early. They heard us run through and they heard that I actually didn't know all the words in a row.
Well, we have to thank the band because usually they have a whole other week of practicing before we go on, because usually we're on the fourth Sunday. But because we thought that's invited us, we said, yeah, we'll move it up a week. But that meant the band got 1 week less to learn 4 songs, which is a lot. So 8-Man is next. 8-Man Evolution. Get it? Okay. So this one might be a little tough because I didn't know this one, but the lyrics are great and the chorus repeats itself, so you should be able to catch on.
Now for this one, I'm inviting everyone to stand up as they're willing and able. Get energy and breath flowing through you. Get moving on this beautiful Sunday morning. With the sunlight coming through the window and we just pretend that we're also breathing fresh air. I think I'm sophisticated because I'm living my life like a good homo sapien. But all around me, everybody's multiplying and I'm walking around like Einstein. So I'm no better than the animals sitting in the cages in the zoo, man. 'Cause compared to the forest, the birds and the trees, I am a man. I think I'm so educated. socially life, 'cause I'm a strict vegetarian. And with the overpopulation and inflation and starvation and the crazy politicians, I don't feel safe in this world no more. I don't wanna die in a nuclear war. I wanna sail away to a distant shore and make a headache man. I'm a headache man, I'm a headache man, I'm a headache man. I'm a King Kong man, I'm a voodoo man, oh I'm a headache man. As compared to the sun that sits in the sky, compared to the clouds as they roll by, compared to the bugs and the spiders and flies, I am a headache man. La 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 la.
Man's evolution to create a city at the moment after home. Just give me one half chance not to take off all my clothes and live in the car.
It's the only time that I feel at peace is swinging up and down in a coconut tree. Oh, what a life of luxury to be a headache man. I'm a headache man, I'm a headache man, oh, I'm a headache man. I'm a King Kong man, I'm a voodoo man, oh, I'm a headache man. I look out the window and I can't see the sky. The air pollution is all hogging up my eyes. I wanna get out of the city of life and make that headache man. La 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 la. Come on and love me, you ain't my girl.
We'll be
It
so
does so
happy.
happy, you make my world. Oh, I'm a headache man, I'm a headache man, oh, I'm a headache man. I'm a King Kong man, I'm a voodoo man, oh, I'm a headache man. I'll be yours and you be my Jane. I'll keep you warm, you keep me safe. Sit in the trees, take my hands away, just like a headache man. I'm a headache man, I'm a headache man, oh, I'm a headache man. I'm a King Kong man, I'm a voodoo man, oh, I'm a headache man. I don't feel safe in this world no more. I don't wanna die in a nuclear war. I wanna sail away to a distant shore and make my headache man. La la la
Now for our very serious reading from the Gospel of the Flying Spaghetti Monster.
I'm going to read an excerpt from the Gospel of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, from pirates to people. So, any discussion of evolution will eventually lead us to ourselves. Humans have been around for as long as we can remember, and yet evolutionists will tell you that we weren't. They will tell you that all humans and chimpanzees share a common ancestor some 5 million years ago, and that we diverged from that common ancestor and eventually invented the space shuttle, while chimpanzees were only able to invent the stick. To support this thesis, scientists tell us that we share 95% of our DNA with chimpanzees, and yet we share 99.9% of our DNA with pirates. I find this very suspicious that biology textbooks don't mention that. I ask you, who is the more likely common ancestor? And are the pirates not the chosen people of the Flying Spaghetti Monster? Why don't we spend so much time talking about something that didn't happen while the Flying Spaghetti Monster is dangling his noodly appendage right in front of our faces? But I shall persevere just a little further, and I shall examine the human body. Specifically, I will examine organs that have been deemed vestigial or useless as a result of losing their function over a millennia of evolution. Male nipples. Fallacy. Scientists believe that humans had breasts or doves back in the Stone Age. Fact. Male nipples were used by pirates as portable weather stations. Their nipples were, with their nipples, they were able to determine the direction of the trade winds and, depending on the stiffness, how cold it was outside. The tailbone. Fallacy. Evolutionists claim that the tailbone, or coccyx, which has no documented use, is an unusual remnant of a larger bone growth that might once have formed an ancestral tail, homologous to the functional tails of other primates. Facts. Fact. Humans with tails are scientists' eye. Couldn't the coccyx have served other purposes? I have carefully researched this issue and have compared the coccyx to other unusual bone growths in animals, and the literature has led me to a single overriding conclusion. Lots of animals have horns on their heads, and these aren't thought to be the remnants of a larger bone growth, probably because, unlike the coccyx, horns have a purpose today. But what if the original purpose of the coccyx has simply been rendered useless by today's culture? If you examine the coccyx closely, you'll see that the bony growth is very similar, when you think about it, to a horn, which is the structure used by many animals for fighting. I submit, then, that the coccyx is not a vestige of an ancestral tail, but rather an effective, albeit strangely placed, defense and fighting mechanism. I imagine two opponents fighting over a woman or choice cave real estate would have run backward at each other, their asses outstretched. Much the way elk fight with their opponents. I have termed this ass fighting. This makes sense if you think about it, as it would leave their hands free to carry whatever they needed, most likely food or rocks. As further evidence, the coccyx is a fighting feature, and that some knowledge of its use has survived culturally through the years. Consider how quickly someone will run away from you if you run at them backward, ass first. I suggest that those who doubt this hypothesis put this to the test and attempt to ram their asses into everyone they see in the next few days. As a side note, women are not advised to do this around the company of perverted men. I feel confident that most, if not all, of these targets will, at the very least, be afraid. I see no explanation for why this would occur, other than we know, subconsciously, that the coccyx is a weapon, not a vestigial tail. One other vestigial feature. Fallacy. The human genome provides evidence that we humans were not created ex nihilo, but instead had to evolve systematically just like all other animals. Ex nihilo means nihilos were an early Roman snack food, an early predecessor of a Dorito. Essentially, this term means from Doritos. As evidence, scientists point to lots of non-functional DNA, including many inactive pseudogenes that are functional in some of our ancestors but aren't today. One example is that, often cited, is the case of vitamin C synthesis. While all primates, including humans, carry a gene responsible for synthesizing vitamin C, that gene is inactive in all members of primate families but one, man. Scientists point to this as evidence of our shared lineage, although I can't figure out why. Fact. Pirates, our ancestors, lived in the tropics and ate a lot of food. And that's all. Thank you.
So this one just struck a chord with me because I have a small child, and there's that like, how do you be a parent moment, and then I read this and I was like, oh no. it only kind of really I saw it. I'm actually kind of a speaker of here's my little intro. So Professor Christian Schatz is assistant professor of psychology here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She got her PhD in 2006 from Harvard University, Her area of research is about the development of social categories and preferences in early childhood, and trying to understand how people create categories for things like gender, race, social class, and how those things are informed by the culture that a person is raised in. I first heard about Kristen, found her when someone said, hey, you should take a look at these grant recipients. So in 2012, Kristen was awarded a gratitude research grant from the University of California, Davis, and the John Templeton Foundation, basically for the research she was doing, but the grant is designed to help expand the scientific understanding of gratitude and how gratitude works. And so I was looking through these neat research studies that people were doing, and lo and behold, I found a U Madison professor amongst all of these very well-recognized researchers from Berkeley and Harvard, and I was like, sweet, and then I asked her if she would speak for us, and she said yes, so that's how we got her. And I recently was looking over some of the studies she was doing, and she's actually done a wide breadth of different research on how children perceive people with disabilities and without disabilities, how children relate to food and how people tell them how to relate to food. And she actually did a study. Did you actually go to South Africa for this study to see how race can create a preference in children? And they actually went to South Africa to perform a study, which is a majority black country, to see if it was really race or if it was also tied into socioeconomic status. Anyways, there's a lot of really cool research out there that she has done. I'd like to invite her up, and and I'll plug in my machine, and she'll give us a talk.
Yourselves for a second. We have to do a computer change. There we go.
Listen, you know what my plug one? Okay.
Okay, well, thanks so much for having me to speak to you this morning. I'm going to, can you hear me or no?
Turn that out somehow.
Can you hear?
Hang on one second.
Okay, I'll be. How's that, a little better?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to end the talk by talking about some of my own work, but I thought in the spirit of the topic for today, I'd actually review some of the more general things that we know about children's cooperative tendencies and the origins of those things. So that's where we'll start, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what we're trying to do in my lab now. So humans are amazingly cooperative. We work together to achieve things that no single person could achieve on their own, including, as a shout out to the song, which I didn't know about, the pyramids. And beyond the things around us as evidence for human cooperation, there are tons of studies by social scientists demonstrating human adults' capacity to engage in prosociality across who maybe aren't capable of doing some of the things like this on the slide yet, but who are nevertheless engaged members of their social communities, and namely that's children. And I also think that studies of children together with studies of non-human animals, which I won't focus on today, but those together can shed light on the evolutionary and developmental origins of achievements like these. So evolution involves a pretty intense competition between individuals for survival and passing on of genes, yet we nevertheless observe cooperative behavior in primates as well as in other members of the animal kingdom. So I've just chosen two baby vampire bats as an example of a case where you see sharing between members of the species. And that pair of facts, that tension between this motivation to kind of continue on our own genes versus help other members of our species, has really fascinated evolutionary biologists for decades. And scientists have proposed a number of mechanisms to explain the evolution of cooperation, and I've listed just some of them here. But one idea is that we evolved to help others because helping our kin helps pass along our own genes to the extent that we share those genes with members of our families. But we also cooperate with people we're not related to, and so another idea is that the evolution of cooperative behavior was favored by the probability of future mutual interactions. So if you're going to have repeated encounters with somebody, you might prefer to cooperate rather than defect, because ultimately you'll kind of get back what you gave into a relationship. A third idea is that helping someone establishes good reputation, so you become known as a helpful person, and that gets rewarded by others, and that's one reason we tend to cooperate. And yet a fourth idea is that people help others because doing so helps their group, and a group of cooperators is likely to succeed over the course of time rather than a group of defectors. So those are just some of the explanations, and if you read different articles or theories, you'll see people favoring one over the other, although I'll point out that it's possible that all of those and more provided mechanisms for supporting cooperative tendencies in humans. But whatever the mechanisms are, if it's true that humans evolved these tendencies to be pro-social toward others, you might expect to find evidence of those tendencies in the youngest members of our species, and in fact you do. So I'll go through some of the findings just to illustrate that point. So one is that children show concern for others very early in development. So when newborn infants hear another infant crying, they become distressed and start crying themselves. And it's not just because they hate the noise, and it's not just because they hate crying, because they don't do it when they're played recordings of their own crying. So it seems specifically like they're reacting to or particularly distressed by crying of other infants. As early as their first birthday, actually, even though the child in this picture is a little older than that, children also take steps to comfort other people who are in distress. So if somebody's crying or if somebody's hurt themselves by running into a podium, you see very young children, as young as a year of age, walking over to the person to comfort them, patting them on the back or rubbing the area of injury or giving them a hug or trying to kiss them. And I'm sure if you've been around children, you've had the opportunity to observe some of those moments, and they're particularly endearing. Toddlers also readily help other people achieve their goals, as demonstrated most clearly and perhaps most acutely by studies conducted at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig. So I'll show you 4 examples of helping on the part of an 18-month-old, but some of the simple behaviors that you'll see here are present even a few months earlier in development. So here are 4 examples of, cute examples, of kids actually helping somebody else in need. Oh, they're all in German. That's one case, and children don't do that if the person just intentionally throws a clothespin on the ground like they meant to do it, and they don't indicate that they need help. So it's not just that we have a proclivity to pick up clothespins. Somebody has to be, saying that, hey, I need help with this situation. Here's just a second example. My students always love that one.
That
And again, kids don't do that if the adult is intentionally setting the little pieces to the side. They only do it when the adult seems to be trying to do something else and is failing. Nobody's ever asked what kids actually think of the adults in these studies. No question. I think there's just elastic football.
Oh.
So one could reasonably ask when seeing behaviors like that or more natural behaviors in the real world, whether those sorts of helping behaviors are really natural or intrinsic or spontaneous on the part of young children, or whether children are doing it because they've been rewarded to do it in the past, so a more socialization kind of perspective. And that's a difficult question to answer, especially because the children in these studies are toddlers and they've had some time to participate in the social world. But I think there are a few pieces of evidence that children aren't doing it simply for a reward. First is there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence from naturalistic observations that parents give a lot of rewards to children for helping. They certainly acknowledge those acts, but it's not like every time a child picks up a napkin off the floor, somebody's like, oh, hold on, that's worth $5, and is running over to give them these kinds of rewards. The second piece of evidence is when researchers do the same kind of studies that I just showed you before, but they manipulate what the parent is doing, so the person who would have been most present in the child's life and maybe doing that kind of socialization or rewarding, kids don't really seem to care about whether the parent is present or encouraging them or not. So here are rates of helping in 3 different cases. So in a kind of pre-phase before the experiment, during the actual experiment, they manipulate what the parent is doing. In one case, the parent is actively encouraging the child, like, go over there and help that person, come on, go do that. In another case, the parent was passively observing, so just watching what the child was doing in the room. And in another case, the parent was completely absent, so not in the room at all when the child was given an opportunity to help. And what you can see is that rates of helping are high overall, but in fact, they're quite high when parents aren't in the room at all and certainly aren't actively encouraging them and aren't even present. These young children are highly likely to provide help, and even when the parent's not in the room, to say good job or give them a reward. The other interesting thing is that when you do reward children for helping, it doesn't seem particularly effective if what you want to do is increase their helping behavior. So when people repeated the same study I showed you before, where children were given opportunities to help, and they preceded it by kind of a pre-phase where children received either verbal praise for helping somebody, no reaction for helping somebody, or actually material rewards like candies or stickers for helping somebody, and then they went and measured toddlers' willingness to help again in the future. What they found is that those who received a neutral response and those who received verbal praise were highly likely to help later on, but those who received the material rewards for helping actually were less likely to help later on. And so not only do you see the rewards actually decreasing children's kind of natural proclivity to help, you also see in the case of the first 2 bars that praising a child for helping and then asking whether that will make them help more later doesn't seem to change their behavior. And perhaps the most compelling case for the idea that human socialization is at least not necessary for the sorts of helping behaviors I showed you comes from studies of chimpanzees, who in fact will help someone out if they can't reach an object. So here's a similar study conducted between a chimpanzee and the person that the chimps spend the most time with, their handler. So you see there, you see an ape actually engaging in the same kinds of behaviors behaviors that human children were, and certainly it's not the case that these chimpanzees are living in homes and getting rewarded for doing all this helping after dinner. So at least suggests that that's not necessary for us to observe these kinds of helping behaviors. The tendency to be prosocial is also seen across different kinds of situations. So we also see prosociality when it comes to children sharing resources. So as one example, if preschoolers are given the job of helping someone else, in this case a doll, distribute resources to other people, they tend to do so in an egalitarian manner. So for example, if there are 4 dolls in need of something and there are 4 resources, children don't take them all and just pile them in front of one doll that they might like better than the others. Rather, they tend to distribute resources in a one-to-one manner, so everybody gets one. And in a second study, researchers showed that it's also the case that when children themselves stand to gain or lose something, so they're not helping some doll give out resources, but rather they're actually giving up their own resources, children can be quite generous. So in one study, 3-year-olds worked together to open up a kind of complicated apparatus that they had to work really hard to get into, and that apparatus contained different rewards. For example, 4 gummy bears, very rewarding for 3-year-olds. And after that, the researchers measured what children did with the spoils of their collaborative work. And what most of them did was share the resources equally, 2 for the one child and 2 for the other child, even in cases where it would have been really easy for one kid to dominate all the resources because they were clumped closer to one child or the other. That's not what happens. It's as if kids are saying, hey, we work together to get these things out. Let's go ahead and divide them up equally. And that was the most common tendency you saw among children. Now, all these behaviors are really nice, and it's particularly interesting to see them emerging in children who are very young. But it's worth noting, just to be perfectly fair of the evidence, that kids aren't always running around helping all people at all times and being completely selfless. You may have noticed this if you spend time around children. And in fact, that point about selectivity is related to the mechanisms I was talking about before by which cooperative tendencies may have evolved in the first place. So we know, for example, that young children tend to be more generous toward family members than toward those they don't know very well. They also tend to give more resources to friends than to people who they don't like very much. And they also tend to give more to members of their social in-group. So for example, if an experimenter tells them that they're dividing up resources and they can give things to somebody who goes to their school or somebody who doesn't go to their school, children are more likely to give more stuff to kids who go to their school than to kids who don't go to their school. And that kind of selectivity doesn't seem like a big deal when you're talking about favoring your friends or your family or favoring people who have been nice to you in the past rather than somebody who hasn't been particularly nice. Those all seem like really natural, normal things to be doing. But in my lab, we've also started to see cases where we see that selectivity emerging in cases where children haven't met anybody who they're presented with the opportunity to share resources between. So to just take one example, in our recent study with preschool-aged children in Madison, most of whom were white, we found that children were more generous toward people from their racial in-group versus people from a racial out-group, even though they'd never met any of the people they were giving things to before. So here's what trials in this study tended to look like. Kids saw a bunch of them. This is just one example. And we also varied what side different people were on and so forth. So it's not just that kids like to give more to the person on the left or to the right. So what happened is that children saw photographs of one African American child next to one white child and were given little coins to distribute to the kids. And we told participants that the coins could be used to buy really awesome prizes later, so we gave them a little bit of value. And what we found is that they tended to distribute these coins in a way that favored unfamiliar white children over equally unfamiliar black children, even though we did provide them with a way to be equal, which is in the case of giving 3, we said, you know what, if you don't want to give all of them away, you can always just set one aside in this box here and we'll put it away. So they could have distributed the resources in an equal manner, but we also gave them cases where they just had 2 resources and 2 people. And in cases where those 2 individuals differed in race, we saw some children actually, and as the group on the whole, giving more resources to their racial in-group members than to racial out-group members. Now, before kind of interpreting that, I think it's worth pointing out that we don't see evidence of this sort of race-based favoritism early in development. So, for example, we know that 10-month-old infants are equally interested in interacting with individuals who match their racial group identity versus individuals who don't. And this is shown really cutely in studies where 2 people come up and they will smile at and talk to the child, and then both of them reach out toward the child and maybe offer a toy or offer their hands. And what we find is that babies don't seem to use race as a basis to make those decisions. They certainly see differences in skin color, that's been shown in other studies, but they don't seem to use it to guide their social decisions. In fact, in another study, even 2.5-year-old children, when they were presented with individuals who differed in race and were given a resource to distribute between them, tended to distribute resources equally. So we're starting to see a change over development. We're very early in life, kids don't seem to care very much about skin color, and later on in the preschool years, they're kind of developing a concern for that distinction and using it to guide some social behaviors. So clearly something is developing. And I think there are many explanations for what's developing, but I think one plausible idea based on these data is that children over development might learn that when they need something, that help is more likely to come from a racial in-group member than a racial out-group member. And that's not because that's if children took a population view that would be true, but in their local experiences, especially if they're raised in a more homogenous community, the kinds of help that they're getting from their family members, extended relatives, peers around the neighborhood might tend to come more often from racial in-group members than racial out-group members over the course of time. And one piece of evidence in favor of that idea is that we found that kids were more apt to share with in-group versus out-group members were also the same kids who, when we asked, said that they expected more resources from in-group members than from out-group members, or they expected to get help from children who belong to their racial in-group over their racial out-group. So one possibility is that expectations about who might help them or give to them might be driving their distribution behaviors. So we're actually trying many different strategies to see if we can address that kind of early racial in-group favoritism that we see and see how malleable children's behaviors are. But one is inspired by the finding about expectations is in fact related to the grant that Naomi alluded to on gratitude. And so we're asking whether if having positive experiences, receiving help from members of diverse racial backgrounds might actually change children's attitudes and behaviors. So in this particular game, which I screenshotted, the child's task is to just drag little objects to the bottom of the screen to complete the puzzle. And at one point they discover that they're missing a little shape that they need to complete the level, and they're allowed to call for help. And the person who always answers and provides the help is somebody who does not match their own racial group membership. And we're interested in whether that changes children's attitudes toward members of different groups and also their behavior toward those groups. And so far we have some promising effects from this intervention, but the work is still ongoing. So stay tuned, or invite me back in 5 years and maybe we'll be done. There is a case, though, where we recently observed children acting against what we normally think of their social preferences when distributing resources to unfamiliar people. So we know that beginning around 4 or 5 years works, children show preferences in favor of unfamiliar people who appear to be higher in socioeconomic status versus people who appear to be lower in socioeconomic status. And that's something we've been finding in a number of times in studies. But in a recent study, I had a thesis student who was interested in how children would distribute resources to people who seem to vary in socioeconomic status. So what happened in this study was that participants who were all school-aged were introduced to a series of pictures of unfamiliar children, and they were each paired with different descriptions, some of which were meant to connote higher wealth, and some of which were meant to connote lower wealth. And we gave participants resources to distribute to these children, and we measured how many things they tended to give to children who had been paired with higher or lower wealth descriptions. So if you hear about a child who has the first story associated with her versus the second story, do you actually, when you're allowed to give out resources yourself, do you actually give more to one person than the other, or do you give equally? And what we found was that children, regardless of their own family's household income, which we measured on a questionnaire, tended to be more generous toward those who were described with those low wealth facts than those who were described with those high wealth descriptions. And you can see that from the green bars here, that's given to the target children when they were described with those low wealth stories versus the higher wealth stories. And on the horizontal axis, you see the income from the participants themselves, and you can see that even participants who come from families who make higher incomes also recognize that when they're in a position to give out resources, and all they know about children are these stories about what their financial backgrounds and their families might be, tend to actually give more resources or be more generous when the child might appear to be in need versus when the child appears to have more resources themselves. Okay, so to kind of round things up, my goal was in this brief talk as a part of this longer service was to give you some evidence that children show some really early proclivities for prosocial behavior. Namely, they show early concern for others' well-being, as demonstrated in that newborn crying and comforting study. Second, they tend to give spontaneous help to people. When people manifest that they need something, children tend to approach those people, provide help, and seem to get a lot of joy out of doing that. They seem very happy when they're in those positions. And they also tend to willingly share resources in a manner that seems fair, and especially after collaborating with an individual, they don't run and take all the gummy bears and peace out. They actually say, hey, the right thing to do here would be to divide these up equally. On the other hand, and as compatible with theories about the evolution of cooperation, we also see children showing some selectivity here in favor of members of their family or friends, as well as social in-groups over social out-groups. On the other hand, we see some nuance there such that children are giving more resources to those who appear to need more resources, namely those who might come from a background that suggests that they have fewer resources themselves. So it's kind of a complicated picture of this really early tendency to be generous, to be helpful, and to be spontaneously engaging in social ways with members of the community and being helpful, but also showing some selectivity in that process over the course of development. So I hope that in addition to giving you a taste of what children's prosocial tendencies look like, I've also met a second goal, which is to convince you that research in child development is really interesting and informative. And if you're interested in learning more or in having your child participate, you can visit our lab's website. All the papers from all of our research are posted there, along with descriptions of them. And our lab, which you'd be welcome to visit, is at the Weisman Center on campus. And we also do short studies with children in the Madison Children's Museum in the Cozy Cottage. So if you ever see research going on there, you should come by and say hi to us. So with that, I will end and turn things back over to you.
You're still around in 5 years. And I actually my son did participate in one of the studies. He got a cool free t-shirt that had the little social kids lab on it. So if I could invite, who's going to run the mic for the airing and sharing portion? Leslie? Okay, so this is airing and sharing. So you guys get to say whatever you want. If you want to give a comment about Kristen's research or about Sunday Assembly, I'm going to start setting up the laptop again so that we can get that going. But if anybody wants to jump in, just raise your hand. Leslie's running for you.
I have a question for the speaker. I was interested to know if any of the tests that have been done on children have involved a possible danger for helping, or something that would be detrimental to them. So, for example, they had to give up a treat or something like that. And what would be the difference in the results of that if it was something negative that would result from that?
Do you want to stand up so we can all hear you?
I don't know that there have been studies that have precisely compared young children to adults on that dimension, in part because it's hard if you think about what a child likes and has to give up versus an adult. But certainly as adults, we give up things that would be beneficial to us to help other people, like when we donate to causes to help people who we've never met before, we're giving up resources that we could spend on ourselves and helping other people. And in fact, in those same kinds of studies with toddlers, they found that if children were engaged in this really exciting game and a person needed help, and so needing to give them help meant giving up this fun game that they were engaged in, that children are willing to give up some of their time or give up playing with a toy to help somebody else out, at least in these kinds of scenarios. So kind of what that calculus is exactly between children and adults, I'm not sure, but you certainly see both patterns of behavior in early development and later development.
Any other comments? Concerns?
Hi, I'm Teresa, and as I was watching the presentation, I was thinking, it's too bad those tendencies go away at some point, because as adults, especially with people of certain ideologies, those things are actually, discouraged, the equal living and the sharing and the helping and all of that. And as adults, obviously looking at our world, something changes, and I don't know if that's because of negative, you're talking about if you don't get help, you tend to, stay with your own kind. I don't know if that's why, but I just thought it's really interesting. We all kind of start out with this, really giving nature, and our world would be a different place if that nature stayed with us our entire lives.
Anybody else?
I was just, that doesn't really necessarily go away. I think I read some studies just recently that said that comparison-wise, percentage-wise, the middle class and the lower middle class give more than the upper class. And it's almost a similar thing to what you were saying in a way. So I don't know if it totally goes away. But I was sort of wondering how much that race thing fits into the parental one. Did you substitute, did you look at any groups where the parents were a different race than the other?
So we would love to do that kind of research. It's just harder. It's just harder work to do because it requires building up a large sample of kids who have those experiences and looking at how, what their behaviors look like. But I think that would be really interesting. We are also interested in looking at children of parents who maybe have many cross-race friends and asking when children, grow up in that kind of an environment and see their parents making friends from different social groups, how that impacts their own preferences and behavior, which is another way of kind of asking about that early experience. And it is, I don't think it's true that, that our tendencies to give more to others go completely away.
So like I said, I'm certain.
Yeah, I mean, in part, right, we cannot possibly help every person at all times on this planet, right? We have limited resources, we have limited time, and so part of what, we have to do is figure out where are we going to devote those resources and time. We can talk about, the moral implications of choosing some groups over others, but we have to figure out some way to do that, because if we ran around the world just completely always giving all of our time and never sleeping and giving away all of our resources, that's not a workable way to live. So it seems that one thing that people sometimes do is tend to favor members of their social in-groups as a way of solving that problem. Like, I can't get to everybody, who should I give to?
All right, thank you everybody for your comments. I'm going to wrap it up. I think Kristen will stick around for a little bit after the talk, so if you have other questions, and or if you want to give comments about the Free Thought Festival or something coming to Madison, we'll be around afterwards as well. Okay, this is the fun, the shaking of hands and greeting of your fellow members. So everybody stand up, and I want you to introduce yourself to someone you don't know and talk about your favorite part of spring. What's your favorite part about spring?
This is not to encourage drinking.
Yeah, and only if you're 21, and only if you have a designated driver.
Well, we decided from pirates.
I hope this works. If not, the music is still really good.
Rhythm of life.
Wild, which is a very fun song, and it relates to the topic because we're born that way. It's a fun song, so we wanted to make it work, so there you go, that's how it ties in.
Instaband. This is
Instaband,
a
karaoke.
karaoke track. And I also invite you for this song to rise and you're willing and able, so you can jam to the steps.
I found this Mark Twain quote yesterday when I was playing. So I'll just read it in case folks can see it. Man has been here 32,000 years. That it took 100 million years to prepare the world for him is proof that that is what it was done for. I suppose it is, I don't know. If the Eiffel Tower were now representing the world's age, the skin of the paint on the pinnacle knob at its summit would represent man's share of that age. And anybody would perceive that the skin was what the tower was built for. I reckon it would, I don't know. Okay, announcements. So most of the announcements are in your program somewhere. So we'll start with the calendar. We do have an APS support group. As I mentioned, this is the time for, if you need some catharsis, if you need a group of supportive people to help you deal with being an atheist, doubting, just dealing with non-shared beliefs with those around you, come join us. We also have our next service in the fourth Sunday of April with Dan Barker, the Freedom from Religion Foundation co-president, is going to speak about his new book. We also have a trivia night on the 25th. We're looking to start a book club. We're going to read Waking Up by Sam Harris. We haven't picked date times yet, so if you're interested, just email us. We can get that going. The Humanist Union of Madison has their meeting on April 5th. They're going to go over some Free Thought Festival highlights, and then the Madison Skeptics always have awesome stuff going on, and I just can't find that many babysitters. So, but they were eating Mexican food skeptically, I kid you not, last week. So we also have charitable opportunities on the back. We just started a 1-week blood donation club, so if you donate blood, there's a little binder after you donate blood by the cookies while you're eating your cookies before they let you leave so you don't pass out in the parking lot. Just sign your name there and give Sunday Assembly credit. Also, we love financial donations. It doesn't cost us too much to put on this program, but it costs us a little because we have to pay for liability insurance, we have to pay for rent, we have to pay for printing stuff. So if everybody can give $3, $5, that would be enough to help us keep going every month to cover our expenses. So there's a donation box at the back. You can go online and donate if you want. Oh, there's an email sign up back there too if you just want to get our regular e-newsletters back by the box in the programs. And then, also, if you want to donate your time to us, we've got a couple of things we could use help with for our weekly or our monthly meetings. If you want to join the band, the instant music actually worked really well today. I thought that worked really well, but we'd like to have real music and musicians who can showcase their talents. So if you want to do the prelude like Eric did before service, or you want to help make music with the band, let us know. And then we do have a couple spots on the board open if somebody wants to be on the board and actually vote to help us make decisions. You can email us at Sunday Assembly. Here, our website is on the inside as well, but we're also on Facebook and on Twitter, and all of our calendar events are on our meetup page, which is listed right up here, and that way you'll get reminded about upcoming events if you want. Okay, did I hit all of our announcements? So then Thoughts is a section of program where whoever the MC is gets to try to pull it all together, make sense of everything we've seen and listened to so far. And if you want to be the MC ever, which is a gig we rotate between people, let us know, because we'd love to mix in more people so you can have an opportunity to put your thoughts together out there too. I didn't know what I was going to talk about, so I started making the slideshow first, and I wanted a cool quote about empathy, so that's what I was Googling. When I found this, I believe empathy is the most essential quality of civilization.
Yeah.
And that just rang so true with me. And Roger Ebert is just a great, really interesting guy in general, but I think this quote is so true because really it's how we've made this big, huge civilization. It's the cooperative tendencies that we've talked about earlier, our ability to help one another and feel the need to help one another. And it's something that I think is pretty unique to us in that we even empathize with people we will never meet, like theoretical people. If there's a tornado or an earthquake or a tsunami or an Ebola outbreak, I can take action here in Madison, Wisconsin to try to help those people who I will never meet in any real way. Like they will never have an interaction with me. Their well-being probably won't really affect me at all. And yet I can take that action, and other animals can't do that. They empathize with the members of their group that they see, but the squirrel in Madison is not affected and can't think about helping the squirrel in California, And so it's I think it's just fascinating that we've become a global society and a global species and a global civilization. And the other interesting thing that I found as I was just kind of surfing around the internet trying to figure out what I was going to talk about was a study who I can't remember the researcher now, but it was published, I believe, back in 2010, Scientific American did a summary of the paper, but it was basically that violence is decreasing and has been decreasing for millennia. And they actually have surprisingly good statistics on this because for millennia, nations have kept really good track of how many people are killed by war. Something that apparently we've been really good at keeping stats on. And so just statistically, the number of people dying by warfare, being murdered, is consistently going down, and we've kept less, well, we haven't kept as good track on things like domestic violence and rape and other, less national related violence, but over the last several hundred years, the trend we've seen is that it's also decreasing. And my theory is that that's because we're becoming globally empathetic and we're becoming our categories, what is this category that I'm in? How do I define myself? The category is actually getting broader. It's no longer just me in my little city or me in my little nation state or me in my fiefdom, but the categories are getting bigger and we're including more people. And technology is actually helping us do that. Like, we're no longer just isolated from another. We can instantly talk to people around the globe and have a sense of what it might be like to live in Korea, even though I will never live in Korea. I can see pictures of that. I can look at videos of people living that way. And so my understanding of a human being actually encompasses that very different life than I will ever live. So that's my thought, is that, like, I get bogged down by politics and just global warming and, the terrible news about the war that's going on. It seems like all over the place. But if you take a bigger view, if you take a step back and you look at, even in the last 2-3 generations, 100 years ago, women got the vote. 50 years ago, people were marching in Selma to get their voter rights. Just in the last couple of years, lesbian and gay people have gotten a strong foothold on marriage equality. That time scale is infinitesimal when you look at how long humans have been around and then at a geological scale. So change is actually happening. Things are actually getting better, even if our small personal view of the last 6 months, the last year, the last couple of years doesn't necessarily feel that way. So a little ball of hope, a little bright shining ray to your day, trying to keep the bigger perspective when I just start hearing about the presidential election that we already have to start thinking about, even though we're even a year away from it. So those are my thoughts. Hopefully it helps lift you up a little. Okay, closing. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to have one more song, and the band's going to go out, with a blast, so that you don't have to stick around. If you want to ask questions, we'll be around. We'll be tearing down. After the last song, we're going to do socializing and brunch. You can head downstairs, get food, whatever you want, and then we'll head back up to the 3rd floor to just hang out and chit-chat. Is there anything else I forgot? Thank you so much for coming. If you have any questions, email us or grab us afterwards. We'll see you guys upstairs, hopefully. So the song is I'm a Believer, ironically, because we're here at Sunday Assembly as part of the Free Thought Fest, so we like that. But it's by the Monkees. The earlier song was 8 Man and Monkees aren't really related, but we thought it was close enough and we liked the song enough that we were going to do it anyway. Oh, should we stand up right now? No. What else you want?
You're welcome to
I
lie
don't
down.
want to sit up in front.
You can even lie down on the floor.
I was on a journey
Thank